The first step to replacing your rear trailing arm ball joint is to jack up the rear of the car. Obviously put the car placed safely on jack stands and remove the wheels using a 17mm socket. The next step is to remove the entire brake caliper and bracket. Do this by removing the anti-rattle spring, then the dust caps, then the two brake caliper guide pins, 7mm bolt, and finally the caliper itself with two 16mm bolts. Remove the anti-rattle spring. Be sure to use eye protection unlike I did. And then after removing the dust caps, you're going to remove the brake guide pins, the caliper guide pins. There's one up top and one down there. It might be necessary to compress the brake caliper to get it to pull off. Once you do that, the next step is to remove the brake caliper bracket, shown right there, and you do this by removing the two 16mm bolts on the back. The next step is to remove the brake rotor itself, fold down the brake shield to get a little bit more room, and ultimately remove the strut bolt, again to get more room. Remove the brake rotor by first loosening the 6mm or T40 lock nut and then just sliding it right off. Next, bend the brake shield down so that you're able to access the rear trailing arm ball joint right there. At this point, you should be able to locate where the old rear trailing arm ball joint is and see where the new one's going to go. To give yourself a little bit more room, go ahead and remove the 18mm bolt at the bottom of the rear strut. This will just drop the entire wheel assembly down a little further and give you more room to work. The next step is to use two ratchets and/or sockets to remove the 18mm bolt that holds the old rear trailing arm ball joint in place. Be advised, when the pin is removed, the wheel will drop even further, so just be clear that there's enough clearance and your feet and stuff aren't underneath. I used an 18mm socket and an impact wrench, and it came right out. And then once it's done, as you can see, the rear trailing arm ball joint will have dropped down a couple inches. The next step is to actually remove the old trailing arm ball joint. The ball joint should be pushed toward the rear of the car. Thus, when you set this up, it should be end nut, receiving cup, old ball joint, push washer, pushing bolt. Be sure to lubricate your kit as recommended. This is the swabbing kit that I purchased for this job and hopefully many others. And this is what I used: the pushing washer, receiving cup, pushing bolt. Here's the way I set it up. Again, we're trying to push the old ball joint toward the rear of the car, so from right to left. This is me setting it up. Again, your pushing rod should go through the old ball joint. It'll be set up like this, and then you simply tighten from the pushing rod, right to left in this case, and it will eventually push your old ball joint out. And there's a comparison of my old and new ball joint. The old one's pretty beat up. To install the new trailing arm ball joint, you pretty much want to do the opposite of what you did to remove the old one. Again, you're trying to push the new one on from left to right in this case, or toward the front of the car. So here's the reverse setup with the pushing bolt on the left this time, the receiving cup on the right, the new ball joint, and the car housing. I did have a second set of hands for this, which was nice, but ultimately it could be done with just one person. And that's what it looks like when the new ball joint is installed. The final step is to put it all back together. The through bolt for the rear trailing arm ball joint that you just replaced, put back on the strut mount bolt, bend the brake shield back, reattach the rotor, and then put the brake caliper and bracket back on. The through bolt for the new rear trailing arm ball joint is 86 foot-pounds. Sorry that this is from the other side of the car, but I used a floor jack to jack up the wheel and then ultimately reattach the rear strut mount bolt at 74 foot-pounds. The T40 bolt that holds the rotor on is 12 foot-pounds. The two 16-millimeter bolts that hold the brake caliper bracket are 81 foot-pounds. The Allen wrench caliper guide pins are 22 foot-pounds.